What's up, y'all? Week 11 is knocking on the door, and for most of us, that means we've got 1 or 2 weeks to get our rosters right, to get into the fantasy football playoffs, and hopefully win the whole thing. And I gotta tell you, I've been playing fantasy football for 20 plus years, and I don't recall a time where I saw 2 rookies this late in the season in unison have so many things aligned to set them up to potentially be a league winner. Let's dive in. So there's been a lot of discourse on social media this week about the 2 players we're about to discuss. Some people like them, some people don't, which really brings me to an overarching question that I get a lot, which is, what are the things we should be looking for when we go to pick up someone off the waiver wire? Historically, I have 2 things that I like to look at. Number 1, if we're right about the decision that we make, is there league winning upside here with the player? Number 2, does the player have a reasonable path to getting production or to getting volume? And again, reasonable. Neither of these things are going to be for sure. We will be right sometimes, we will be wrong sometimes. But if we're consistently looking for the right ingredients, it gives us a chance to have a process. It gives us a chance to reflect. It gives us a chance to determine what mistakes do we make, where can we improve in the future. So let's dive into these 2 guys now. So the first player we're going to talk about is Christian Watson, wide receiver for the Green Bay Packers. I know, you guys have all seen him. He was on in the late window of games. He destroyed my Dallas Cowboys. 8 targets, 4 receptions, 107 yards, and 3 touchdowns. What's crazy about it, the 3 touchdowns are really throwing people off. They're like, okay, can this sustain? Guess what? Probably not, but that's okay. And it leads us to the number 1 question. Can he be a difference maker if we're right? Obviously, that stat line tells us he can, but what about the underlying utilization? In his first full game, 84% route participation, check. 42% target share. We actually care about that more than his yards, more than his touchdowns. He was able to come out and demand looks. He also accounted for 74% of the air yards and 100% of the end zone targets. And guess what? He's the number 34 pick overall in the draft. That means the Packers not only need him to succeed, they want him to succeed. So now on the season, he sits at a 25% targets per route run. That is the number 1 on the Packers. 2.24 yards per route run, which is also number 1 on the Packers. And how is that? It's because he's shown an early connection with a quarterback you guys may have heard of, Aaron Rodgers, future Hall of Famer, a guy that we've seen support multiple high-end fantasy wide receivers through the years. So now for the second half of the equation. Does Christian Watson have a reasonable path to opportunity? And I think the answer is clearly yes for a few reasons. We've already talked about the draft capital. It's an early second-round pick. The Packers have a vested interest in seeing this player get on the field. But they also need him to get on the field. Allen Lazard has been nice, but he hasn't been special. He's not a guy that's demanding 30% target shares. He's not a barrier. He's been really good against man coverage. You ISO him, you throw him a back shoulder fade, great, but he's not dominating all over the field. And then if you think about Romeo Doubs, the guy that actually got his opportunity, if you remember, because Christian Watson got put on the pup in training camp and gave him a chance to win the job. But he hasn't necessarily come through. He's been okay, but not a guy that can give them the explosive plays down the field. Really almost more of a clone, similar to Lazard, and a guy that you can throw the fade, the back shoulder to. But really, with Watson, we have a guy that opens up a whole new dynamic for their offense, which is why I think you'll see him continue to be highly involved. So in summary, we've got a player that's got the draft capital. They've already flashed the talent on the field. They've got a great quarterback, and they've got low target competition. And then finally, this is something we've seen from rookie wide receivers historically, guys like Tyreek Hill. Guys like Odell Beckham Jr., A.J. Brown, they really have their breakout in the second half of the season. So that's another historical trend that we can take into account. Is this for sure going to work out? I don't know. But the right ingredients are there. There's still a chance it could bust. This could go back to a rotation with Romeo Doubs. He could get hurt again. There's a lot of things that could happen with Christian Watson, but those ingredients are there. And in fact, here's a list of players that I would drop right now for Christian Watson: Josh Palmer, Darnell Mooney, Jerry Jeudy, Adam Thielen, Drake London. I would even drop George Pickens because I feel that what Watson has shown right now and all the other factors that we've talked about actually line up better for him than any of the players we just discussed. So the second player we're going to talk about is Isaiah Pacheco from the Kansas City Chiefs. 16 carries for 82 yards this last weekend. I know what you're thinking. Dwain, That doesn't sound like league winning upside to me. And you would be right. That's not league winning upside. However, if we dig a little bit deeper, I think the answer is yes, that does exist. First of all, we've seen Pacheco in a slow rise over the last couple of games. He had a 56% snap share. He had 74% of the rushing attempts this last weekend. That is by far the most for him this season. Number two, we're talking about a Kansas City offense that is number one in the NFL in scoring. Number three, he is also a rookie. I guess if you look at this one, you could also count it against him because what was he? He was a round 7 pick. But remember, with running backs, the ultimate thing we're looking for is really the volume. And we've seen this trend over the last few weeks with Andy Reid going to Pacheco. So now let's talk about the path to opportunity. Is it there for Pacheco? Well, we've already talked about what happened last week with the 74% rushing attempt share. He's already taken over Clyde Edwards-Helaire, who had 0% of the rushing attempts last week. Now, I know we talked about this being a pass-heavy team, and that does reduce the amount of touches that we could see Pacheco get. But at 75 to 80%, even if the Chiefs remain pass-heavy, that's still going to be somewhere between 15 and 20 carries a week. If he gets 1 or 2 targets, you're talking 17 to 22 opportunities in the number 1 scoring offense in the league. Could you imagine if you woke up tomorrow morning in a fairy tale land and a guy like Dameon Pierce was available on your waiver wire, but he played on the Kansas City Chiefs and he had the role that we've been used to seeing Dameon Pierce have? That's essentially what we have right now with Isaiah Pacheco. So he's a guy that we want to be in on. So to summarize for Isaiah Pacheco, we're talking about the lead early down back in the number 1 scoring offense in the NFL. A profile very similar to Dameon Pierce. You could even think James Conner from last year. He has that kind of touchdown upside in Kansas City. And if we think back to all of the buzz around Isaiah Pacheco, the ADP skyrocketing up this preseason, we really couldn't have hoped for a better role than this. In fact, there are multiple backs that I would consider cutting right now to get Pacheco on my roster. Kareem Hunt, stuck behind Nick Chubb, better player than CEH. James Robinson, Melvin Gordon, 3-way backfield, not a very good offense. Khalil Herbert, now injured. No reason to wait. We are in crunch time. Darrell Henderson, do you really want anyone from the Rams? Kenyon Drake, because the Ravens' backfield is always a rotation, and they're going to be getting healthy. And then finally, Damian Harris. He's now behind Ramondre Stevenson. I think these are all easy cuts to go after Pacheco.